The incident and Meridian Colony Captain Elena Rivera had been navigating trade routes for 12 years. But she had never seen anything like this. The Wandering Star. Her merchant vessel dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Meridian system, expecting to find the usual bustle of colonial activity. Instead, her sensors detected silence. Dead, terrible silence. Her first officer, David Chun, stared at his console with growing horror. The readings made no sense. Meridian Colony, 85,000 human settlers, showed no power signatures, no communication signals, no life signs above ground. Elena felt ice forming in her stomach as she ordered the ship closer. What they found would haunt her forever. The colony was gone, not damaged, not partially destroyed, but methodically erased. The biodomes that had protected 3 generations of families were shattered glass and twisted metal. The agricultural sectors where children had learned to grow earth crops under alien suns were burned to ash. The medical centers, the schools, the homes, all reduced to rubble by weapons fire from orbit. David's hands shook as he brought up the sensor logs. The attack had happened only 6 hours earlier. 6 hours ago, people had been living their lives, unaware that death was coming from the stars. Elena activated the emergency beacon and began scanning for survivors. Her crew worked in grim silence, knowing what they would likely find. The first survivor they located was a young engineer named Thomas Way. He had been working in the underground maintenance tunnels when the attack began. His story came out in broken sentences, interrupted by shock and grief. He described ships appearing without warning, massive vessels painted in deep crimson and black. The Crescent Dominion, he said. Everyone knew about the Crescent. They controlled 70 star systems and ruled their territory with absolute authority. Thomas explained that the Crescent had sent no warnings, made no demands, asked no questions. They simply opened fire. He watched on emergency monitors as orbital strikes vaporized entire city blocks. People tried to evacuate, but the Crescent targeted the landing pads first. They wanted no one to escape. When some colonists fled into the wilderness, the Crescent sent ground forces to hunt them down. Elena and her crew found more survivors over the next 8 hours. Each had a similar story. The Crescent had been thorough, efficient, and merciless. They killed combatants and civilians without distinction. Age meant nothing to them. Purpose meant nothing. They exterminated the colony because they could, because humans had dared to settle in a region of space the Crescent considered theirs. Medical officer Dr. Saro Conqua treated the survivors as best she could, but some wounds went deeper than anything medicine could reach. A mother who had lost 3 children, a teacher who had watched his students die, a security officer who had tried to fight back with nothing but a pistol against ships that could destroy cities. Each story added to the growing weight of horror that settled over the Wandering Star. Elena recorded everything, every testimony, every sensor reading, every image of destruction. She knew this evidence would be crucial. Humanity had been part of the galactic community for only 30 years, still learning the rules, still trying to find their place among species that had traveled the stars for millennia. The Crescent had just taught humanity a brutal lesson about those rules. The transmission Elena sent back to Earth was marked with the highest priority codes. She included all the evidence, all the testimonies, and her own report describing the complete annihilation of Meridian Colony. She ended with a simple statement that would be repeated countless times in the days ahead. The Crescent Dominion had committed an act of unprovoked genocide against human civilians. They had started this. The message reached Earth 36 hours later. The United Terran Assembly, humanity's governing body for space affairs, convened an emergency session within hours. Representatives from every nation, every major corporation, every space settlement gathered to review the evidence. The chamber fell silent as they watched the recordings. Grown politicians wept openly. Military commanders sat with clenched fists. Scientists who had spent their lives promoting peaceful exploration felt rage building in their chests. Ambassador Marcus June was chosen to deliver humanity's response. He was a career diplomat, A man who had spent 20 years building relationships with alien civilizations, promoting understanding and cooperation. He believed deeply in the possibility of peace among the stars. Now he would have to speak for a species that had just learned a terrible truth about the galaxy they had so eagerly joined. The United Terran Assembly prepared for 3 days. They gathered every piece of evidence, verified every fact, and consulted with legal experts about galactic law. What they discovered made their anger burn even hotter. The Crescent Dominion had violated multiple interstellar treaties. The attack on Meridian Colony was not just immoral, it was explicitly illegal under laws the Crescent themselves had signed. More disturbing was what humanity learned about Crescent history. This was not their first massacre. Over the past 4 centuries, the Crescent had destroyed 6 other colonies belonging to younger species. Each time, they claimed the settlements were in their territory. Each time, they faced no consequences because the victims were too weak to retaliate and other powerful species chose not to interfere. The Crescent had learned they could commit atrocities without punishment. Marcus Chun stood before the Galactic communication array, knowing that billions of beings across hundreds of worlds would receive this message. Behind him stood representatives of every human nation, unified in their grief and fury. The survivors of Meridian Colony were there too, bearing witness to what had been done to them. The transmission began with the evidence, raw, unedited footage of the attack. Bodies in the rubble, children's toys melted by weapons fire, the last desperate messages from colonists who knew they were about to die. Then came the testimonies, survivor after survivor describing what the Crescent had done. Their voices steady, despite the trauma. Their words clear and damning. They spoke not just for themselves, but for the 84,963 people who could no longer speak. Each name was listed, each life acknowledged. The galaxy would know exactly what had been lost. Finally, Marcus Chun stepped forward to address the civilizations that had remained silent while the Crescent built their empire on fear and violence. His voice was calm, but every word carried the weight of humanity's collective rage. He began by acknowledging that humans were newcomers to the galaxy, that they had much to learn about the ancient civilizations around them, but they had learned something important in the past week. He stated that humanity had discovered the galactic community was not governed by justice or law, but by power and fear. Species attacked weaker neighbors because they could. Ancient empires like the Crescent committed genocide because no one would stop them. The strong preyed on the weak, and the rest of the galaxy looked away rather than risk confrontation. This was the order of things, the way it had been for thousands of years. Marcus Chun's next words would echo across the galaxy for generations. He declared that humanity rejected this order. Humans had not traveled to the stars to become victims or to watch others suffer in silence. The Crescent Dominion had made a choice when they attacked Meridian Colony. They chose to start a conflict with humanity. They chose to make themselves enemies of every human being alive. That choice would have consequences. Asterisk. The proclamation was direct and unambiguous. Humanity would seek justice for Meridian Colony. They would hold the Crescent accountable for their crimes. They would not accept empty apologies or token reparations. The Crescent had started this conflict through an act of deliberate mass murder. Humanity would finish it, whatever the cost. This was not a threat or a negotiation. This was a statement of fact. "You started this," Marcus Chun said, and those 3 words carried a promise that would reshape galactic politics. He continued by addressing the other civilizations watching. Humanity understood they were young and relatively weak. They knew the Crescent had superior numbers and more advanced technology, but humans had something the Crescent had not counted on. They had the memory of Meridian Colony. They had 85,000 reasons to fight. They had a unified species willing to sacrifice everything for justice. The Crescent could destroy human colonies, but they could not break human will. Marcus Chun concluded with an invitation to other species who had suffered under Crescent aggression. Humanity would stand with anyone willing to resist tyranny. They would share their resources, their knowledge, and their determination with civilizations that chose freedom over submission. The galaxy could continue accepting the rule of empires built on fear, or it could choose a different path. Humanity was offering that choice. The transmission ended with a final image, the memorial wall erected at the ruins of Meridian Colony, bearing the names of every person who had died. Above it, a simple inscription in multiple languages, including Crashane script. You started this. We will finish it. The message broadcasts on every known frequency, translated into every major language, sent to every spacefaring civilization in the known galaxy. There would be no one who could claim ignorance of what the Crescent had done or how humanity intended to respond. As the transmission concluded, Elena Rivera stood aboard the Wandering Star, now orbiting Earth while her ship was being retrofitted for military service. She had volunteered immediately, as had her entire crew. They had seen Meridian Colony. They had held the survivors as they wept. They would not rest until the Crescent paid for what they had done. Around her, millions of other humans were making the same choice, volunteering for military service, converting factories to produce weapons, preparing for a war no one had wanted but everyone now accepted as necessary. The Crescent had started this by attacking the defenseless. They would soon learn what happened when humans decided to fight back. Asterisk, the rising storm, the proclamation, reached the Crescent Dominion. Within hours of its broadcast, Supreme Commander Vector watched the human transmission with what his species considered amusement. His secondary arms gestured dismissively at the viewscreen, while his primary hands remained folded across his armored chest. The Crescent had ruled their empire for 8 centuries, through superior military might and unwavering discipline. These humans, barely capable of interstellar travel, thought they could challenge that power with emotional speeches and legal arguments. Vector composed a response that was broadcast across the same channels humanity had used. He acknowledged that the Crescent had indeed destroyed Meridian Colony. He explained that humans had settled in territory the Crescent had claimed 300 years ago, long before humanity even knew other species existed. The colonists had been warned to leave. They had refused. The Crescent had simply enforced their territorial rights, as they always had. He concluded by advising humanity to accept their place in the Galactic Order, before they suffered consequences far worse than the loss of one minor colony. The response was calculated to intimidate and humiliate. Vector had used similar tactics against other young species who had challenged Crescent authority. Usually, they backed down once they realized the enormous power disparity. The Supreme Commander expected humanity would do the same. He was very wrong. Across human space, the proclamation had ignited something that surprised even humanity itself. Every nation on Earth that had spent centuries fighting each other suddenly found common purpose. Ancient enemies sat at the same tables, planning joint military operations. Resources that had been guarded jealously were pooled into a collective effort. The transformation was unprecedented in human history. Within 2 weeks of the Meridian Massacre, humanity had unified in ways that had seemed impossible. Just months before, engineer Sarah Okonkwo found herself at the center of this transformation. She had been designing habitat systems for deep space colonies, peaceful work that helped humanity expand among the stars. Now she stood in a converted manufacturing facility that had once produced civilian spacecraft. Her new assignment was very different. She was leading a team of 300 engineers, tasked with creating weapons systems that could challenge Crescent military superiority. Sarah worked 18-hour days, driven by the memory of Meridian Colony survivors she had treated aboard the Wandering Star. Her team analyzed every piece of data humanity had gathered about Crescent technology. The Crescent ships were larger, faster, and better armed than human vessels. Their shields could absorb incredible amounts of damage. Their weapons could vaporize a city block with a single shot. On paper, they were completely superior. But Sarah had learned that paper specifications meant nothing if you could think creatively. The breakthrough came during a late-night session when Sarah was examining Crescent shield frequencies. The shields were incredibly strong against direct energy weapons and kinetic projectiles. They were designed to stop the kinds of weapons that other advanced species used. But they had a weakness that Sarah suspected the Crescent had never encountered. The shields struggled with multiple simultaneous impacts from different vectors. they could not adjust their frequency fast enough to counter coordinated strikes. Sarah designed the Sentinel-class defense platform around this weakness. Each platform was relatively small and cheap to produce compared to a full warship, but they carried dozens of independent missile systems, each capable of adjusting its approach vector in real time. A single Sentinel could not threaten a Crescent ship, but 20 Sentinels working together could overwhelm the shields with coordinated strikes from multiple directions simultaneously. It was not elegant, but it was effective. Production began immediately. Factories on Earth, Mars, the asteroid belt, and every human colony started building Sentinels around the clock. The platforms were deployed throughout human territory, creating a defensive network unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. Instead of a few powerful ships defending vast areas, humanity created swarms of smaller platforms that could concentrate force wherever needed. The strategy was fundamentally human. If you cannot match your enemy's strength, outnumber and outthink them. While Sarah built defenses, Tactical Commander James Park was preparing humanity's offensive capabilities. James had spent 15 years in Earth's combined military forces, specializing in unconventional warfare. He had studied every conflict in human history, learning from guerrilla fighters who had defeated superior enemies through cunning and determination. Now he would apply those lessons on an interstellar scale. James understood that humanity could not fight the Crescent in traditional fleet battles. The Crescent had 200 warships, compared to humanity's 37. But James did not plan to fight traditional battles. He assembled strike teams of volunteers who were trained in hit-and-run tactics, sabotage, and psychological warfare. His philosophy was simple. Make the Crescent fear every shadow, question every sensor reading, and never feel safe anywhere in their empire. The Crescent provided an opportunity sooner than anyone expected. Supreme Commander Vector, frustrated by humanity's refusal to submit, ordered a second attack. He sent a battle group of 15 warships to destroy another human colony, intending to teach humanity the cost of defiance. The target was New Horizon, a settlement of 40,000 people on the edge of human space. Vector expected the attack would break human resistance and force them to negotiate surrender. The Crescent battle group arrived at New Horizon, confident and prepared for an easy victory. Instead, they encountered something they had never faced before. The colony was surrounded by over 300 Sentinel platforms, all networked together and waiting. When the Crescent ships moved into attack position, every Sentinel opened fire simultaneously. Thousands of missiles streaked through space from hundreds of different angles, each one adjusting its course to maximize the probability of impact. The Crescent shields held for the first wave, and the second. But the third wave began penetrating their defenses. The fourth wave struck hull plating directly. The fifth wave caused catastrophic damage to 2 vessels. The Crescent commander tried to retreat, but the Sentinels had been positioned to create a kill zone. Every direction the Crescent turned, more missiles came at them from new angles. It was chaos and overwhelming firepower, combined with calculated precision. The battle lasted 40 minutes. 8 Crescent warships were destroyed completely. 4 more were damaged so severely they could barely maintain power. Only 3 ships escaped to report what had happened. New Horizon colony survived without a single casualty. The humans had won their first major military victory against the Crescent Dominion, and they had done it using tactics the Crescent had never imagined facing. News of the battle spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. Species that had watched humanity's proclamation with skepticism now saw evidence that humans could back up their words with action. The Crescent, who had seemed invincible for centuries, had been defeated by a species they considered primitive. The psychological impact was enormous. If humanity could fight back successfully, perhaps others could too. James Park did not wait for the Crescent to recover. He launched his strike teams into Crescent territory within days of the New Horizon victory. Small human ships, designed to avoid detection, infiltrated Crescent supply lines. They destroyed cargo vessels carrying military supplies. They hacked into communication networks and spread disinformation. They planted rumors that Crescent leadership was divided and weakening. Each action was small, individually, but together they created an atmosphere of uncertainty throughout the Cretan Empire. One of James's most successful operations involved a mining colony the Cretan had conquered from a species called the Thalion. The Thalion had been enslaved for 70 years, forced to extract rare minerals for Cretan industry. James's team made contact with fellow resistance fighters who had been conducting a hopeless struggle against their oppressors. The humans provided weapons, training, and tactical support. Together, they liberated the colony in a brutal night assault that caught the Cretan garrison completely by surprise. The freed Thalion joined humanity's cause immediately. They knew Cretan technology intimately from decades of forced labor. They understood Cretan military protocols from years of observation. They brought knowledge and motivation that made them invaluable allies. More importantly, their liberation sent a message to other enslaved species throughout the galaxy. Resistance was possible. The Cretan could be defeated. Hope existed if you were willing to fight for it. Within 3 months of humanity's proclamation, the galactic political landscape had transformed completely. The Free Worlds Coalition formed around humanity's call for justice. Species that had suffered under Cretan aggression found common cause. The coalition was not a formal military alliance, but rather a network of civilizations sharing intelligence, resources, and support. Humanity provided military training and defensive technology. Other species contributed their own expertise in various fields. Together, they became a force the Cretan could no longer ignore. Supreme Commander Vector watched his carefully maintained empire begin to fracture. Rebellions erupted on 3 conquered worlds simultaneously. Trade routes his ships had protected for decades became dangerous as coalition forces conducted raids. His own officers began questioning decisions that had always been accepted without debate. The Cretan military machine, built on the assumption of absolute superiority, struggled to adapt to an enemy that refused to fight by traditional rules. Seraph Okonkwo received reports of her Sentinel platforms being adopted by coalition species. They modified the designs to fit their own technology and tactical needs. But the core concept remained the same. Distributed defense networks that could concentrate overwhelming force against larger opponents. She felt pride knowing her work was helping others resist tyranny, but she never forgot what had started this. Meridian Colony remained in her thoughts every day, driving her to create better defenses and more effective weapons. Elena Rivera, now commanding a retrofitted warship called the Meridian's Fury, led strike missions deep into Cretan territory. Her crew consisted of survivors from various attacks, people who had lost everything to Cretan aggression. They fought with a dedication that amazed even veteran military officers. Every battle they won, every Cretan ship they destroyed, brought them closer to justice for the people they had lost. Ambassador Marcus Chun continued his diplomatic work, but now he spoke from a position of strength rather than weakness. Other species that had ignored humanity before now sought meetings and alliances. The Cretan had unwittingly elevated humanity's status by attacking them. Marcus used this new influence to build a coalition dedicated to fundamental changes in how the galaxy operated. No more would powerful empires prey on weaker species without consequences. No more would genocide be accepted as simply the cost of expansion. The Cretan Empire, facing challenges they had never anticipated, prepared for total war. Vector mobilized reserves and called in forces from distant territories. He knew that losing to humanity would mean the end of Cretan dominance. But he had miscalculated badly. He thought this was just about military victory. He did not understand that humanity had fundamentally changed the rules of galactic politics. They had shown that empires built on fear and violence could be resisted successfully. That revelation could not be undone no matter how many battles the Cretan won. 6 months after the Meridian massacre, humanity stood at the center of a growing movement that was reshaping the galaxy. They had not won the war yet. The Cretan remained powerful and dangerous, but humanity had proven something crucial. They had shown that you could fight back against overwhelming odds if you were willing to sacrifice and innovate. The proclamation had not just been words. It had been a promise that humanity was keeping with blood, determination, and an absolute refusal to submit to tyranny. The galaxy was watching a young species teach ancient civilizations a lesson about justice and resistance. The The Crescent had started this conflict believing they would easily crush another weak species. Instead, they had awakened something dangerous and inspiring. Humanity had declared they would finish what the Crescent started, and every victory brought them closer to making good on that promise. Asterisk.